G'day, everyone, and welcome to Seven Questions, a podcast that shares the stories and compelling lessons founders, investors, and leaders shaping our economy. I'm your host, Gerard, founder and investor at Partner and co-founder of Create Financial. Through Seven Questions, we explore the founder journey, idea to legacy, uncovering the insights, lessons, and defining moments that shaped each founder and the amazing business they built. Whether you're a first-time founder, serial entrepreneur, investor, or someone looking for insights on entrepreneurship and what it takes to build a world-class company, these conversations inspire you, get you thinking, and hopefully you'll find some timely wisdom that propels your journey. G'day, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Seven Questions. I have been super excited to have this conversation with a good friend of mine that I've known for almost 10 years. I'd like to introduce you to the managing partner of Mandalay Venture Partners, Mark Gustowski. Hey, Mark, it is great to have you on Seven Questions. Seven Questions is a podcast where we explore the journey of founders and investors, the lessons they've learned, the experiences they've had, the challenges they've faced and overcome, and really try and draw out lessons of value for the audience. So it's great to have you on the podcast. Let's start by helping people get to know you. Why don't you start from the beginning, Mark? What's been your journey as a founder, but then also in your transition to being an investor?
So I actually started my career, Wayne, back in 1998. As a graduate recruit, I was thrown into the Department of Innovation and State Development and landed in a group called the Technology Commercialization Program. I had no idea what those three words meant or what they actually meant for the future of my career. But what it did do was it immediately exposed me to working very, very closely with innovators, founders, researchers, and entrepreneurs. And for about 2 years, I worked with the Victorian State Government on major infrastructure projects and supporting entrepreneurs. So things like the synchrotron down in Clayton in Victoria, the Bio21 precinct, a number of other precincts, and then got exposed to the passion of founders. And you know what it's like, you've been one, and working with people and working alongside people that are doing something that they just love and that they're so deeply passionate about is infectious. And it makes you want to have that same feeling, that same infection that they have. And so about 2.5 years into working with government, I got tapped on the shoulder by my manager at the time, who was the manager of the commercialization team at the Victorian government, who said to me, "Hey, Mark, I'm going to go and start up a biotech company. I'd love you to join me." And so, you know, I at the time, probably ignorantly superannuation and a salary, which was probably the last time I saw a salary, and joined the startup space. That was probably one of the best lessons for me, Wayne, because in the space of 18 months, we set up and shut down a company. So it was almost like a master's in entrepreneurship and business, setting up a company, winning a few big contracts, having macroeconomic conditions outside of your control dictate what happened to the business, and then literally being the last person there, closing the door and emptying the bank account out of what little was left. But that was enough to really give me the bug that, you know what, there's something here that I love and I love doing, and I love being around people that share this passion. And so that, you know, that was probably the entry point that allowed me to start looking at forging a bit of a career in startups and various startups. So that was sort of the start of my journey. I've had a few startups in between, lost a bit of money in between, which I think is also a really good lesson around startups and what you should and shouldn't do. And eventually moved into investment, set up an AFSL financial license, supported a lot of capital raising on our financial license. And there's been a few other stops along the way, but end up here in a venture capital fund supporting, again, passionate founders that love what they do.
Mark, a really varied start to your career and a lot of experiences compressed into what sounds like the first 10 to 12, 14 years. Lots of lessons, and you moved from Melbourne to London and you've ended up in Brisbane. You've been in Brisbane now for how long?
Almost 11 years. So almost a local, almost.
Almost a local. Yeah, me
almost
too, man. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I've been here like 25 or something. Hey, through Seven Questions, we unpack the experiences that you've had as it relates to you now in your capacity as an investor. So I want to dig in a little bit to investment and the investment life you had pre-Mandalay, the creation of Mandalay. What was the catalyst for establishing Mandalay Venture Partners?
Yeah, so in 2011, I was involved in setting up a financial license, particularly for attracting foreign investment into Australia. So this was through the Significant Investor Visa program, and spent about 8 years raising capital for startups, helping startups raise capital, doing advisory work, sitting on boards. I think raised probably sort of in the area of about 100 or 150 million over about 8 years into seed stage to Series A stage startups, agnostic, but generally speaking across agriculture, water, and energy sectors. Really, really enjoyed it, but you're never really in something when you're just brokering deals, and you never really get to be an operator. And I started to miss being an operator. And so I actually was tapped on the shoulder by a headhunter in late 2015, I think it was, mid 2015, about a role for this small fund that was being set up in Queensland. And I didn't think much of it. And they said, look, we'll fly you up to have a chat to the team. And I said, okay, that's great. I'll do that. And it ended up being QUT Creative Enterprise Australia, which was a private subsidiary and a private investment arm of the Queensland University of Technology. And when I joined, we call it CEA, Creative Enterprise Australia, in 2016. It was, I think it was around about January the 28th, 2016. There were 6 staff, of which a couple were part-time. And it was essentially an incubator and a co-working space, which you would remember, around about 1,400 square meters of space, focused on creative technology. What does that mean? Didn't mean a lot back then, but now in the AI age, it means a hell of a lot. We had around about 100 people in the co-working space. I was tasked with the job of setting up the organization's first accelerator programs and helping structure up and launch the startup fund that they had. So they had a fund that was anchored as from a single LP, which was QUT. And so very luckily at the time, just so happens I landed in Queensland when there was an enormous amount of activity. It was actually an amazing period of time. That 2015 to 2018 period in Queensland was something else. And, you'd recall that really well with what you were building. And so the government was very supportive. We launched a number of accelerator programs in the creative technology space, in the fashion technology space. In the fashion space, we signed a number of deals with foreign entities over in Indonesia, Thailand, to run accelerators over there. We ran 4 cohorts of accelerator programs for creative tech, about 6 cohorts in the fashion space. And then we also set up a small venture fund, which was anchored by QUT. We made 10 investments in that investment fund. They've done really well. I think the whole portfolio is now probably post-harvest, but the returns were certainly top quartile for that fund, which was really good for a university fund. We were in the process of raising an ESVCLP, or early stage venture capital limited partnership, as a next fund. And lo and behold, late December 2019, January 2020, COVID hit. And it changed everything. Across Australia, a lot of the universities were quite concerned about the loss of income from international students and obviously borders being closed. So a lot of the subsidiary activities that a lot of the universities were doing were wound up, which unfortunately was the case for CEA. After 14 years of operation, it was also wound up and assets handed back to the university. What I learned in that process, and when I started, as I said, it was 6 people. When I left, it was 17. So we grew pretty quickly. We had a big team. We actually grew maybe a little bit more quickly than what was comfortable for the group. But we learnt and we ran really, really hard and learnt a lot about early stage investing in the creative tech space, mostly pre-seed to seed stage. Really, really enjoyed it. Love the founder journey. Love the excitement founders have at that the seed of an idea. And that's really where we started to get engaged and involved with them. And once we moved away from the university and handed back the portfolio, a number of us sat down and said, well, what do we want to do next? And it wasn't, I don't want to go and work for a big firm. I don't want to work for a top 4. I don't want to do any of that. I actually really want to keep doing what I'm doing, but no one here is doing it in Brisbane. As you would recall at the time, there weren't many venture funds. There were some good syndicates and some good angel investors, but probably not a lot of venture funds. And we can get to the work you did, Wayne, in actually helping seed and set up a lot of the venture activities in the state here. But we sat around a table for a while and a few months to decide what we wanted to do. And we thought, we're pretty good at this early stage stuff and we'd love to give it another swing. And towards the end of our time at Creative Enterprise Australia, we were moving into the food and CPG, fast-paced consumer goods space. We'd done some work with Sainsbury's in the UK, run some programs with Virgin Startup around food and food innovation. And it was an area, when we looked into it, that was really, really underserviced from a finance and a venture perspective. Actually, less than 1.7% of venture capital goes into food tech and agri-tech in the country, yet it represents a significant part of GDP. And that didn't make sense. And, having done a lot of work in the ag space previously, I thought, it's time that we actually start looking at capitalizing this nascent category that has enormous potential. And so we set up a small fund actually in 2020, single LP, only enough money to make 4 investments. So it wasn't very big. We didn't pay ourselves for a long, long while. But what we did do is in a 12-month period with no marketing, no advertising, we made 4 investments. We had over 500 companies from around Australia approach us for capital. Not to say that they were all venture investable, but what it did show is that there's this enormous pent-up demand for support in the ag and the food space. And this is 2020. So post-COVID, supply chains were broken everywhere, and there was a lot of demand and a lot of pressure on logistics. So we made those 4 investments. The other thing we wanted to do, Wayne, at the time was to say, okay, well, we know there's pent-up demand, but can this category really provide the sort of VC returns that your traditional limited partners are looking for? Because if it can't, then why are you doing it? And so we made those 4 investments. They were marked to market about 18 months ago, operating about a 60+% IRR unrealized. What it did was it showed us that when you manage companies properly and you're hands-on at the very early stages and you're acting as an extension of management and you're there to pick up the phone whenever they call, that you can really start to make an impact and reduce the risks that they take and actually help make critical decisions. And so at the end of that period of investment with those 4 companies and over 500 leads from a deal perspective, we thought there's enough here for us to have a really good swing at putting a more substantial venture fund together. And that led to the establishment of Mandalay Venture Partners. And a lot of people ask, why Mandalay? Where did that name come from? And what does it have to do with anything? But it was actually the name of a farm that one of our venture partners and early partners grew up on in New South Wales. And you think of a beautiful old paddock with an old wooden gate falling apart and disheveled, but with in one of those wooden beams, Mandalay carved in with a knife. And that was really where our inspiration came from, back to the land, back to the people, and wanting to help the Australian food and agricultural systems. And a lot of work, a lot of support from so many people along the way to get up and going. And we were probably one of the most exciting days of this part of my career was the day we got a recognition or signing of the first check, anchor in our fund. And
when was that?
So that was provisionally in early 2021.
Yeah.
And it was subject to a whole bunch of caveats, as you can imagine. You must raise capital and you must do all these things, but it was enough to get us going and enough to give us that little bit of juice that you need to keep going when you're pushing really hard. And it was fantastic. It opened up a lot of doors for us to get that first investor check-in. We did take some private capital into Headco for operational support as well, which was incredibly important. We had a couple of really good folks see something in us and see something in the team very early on that they thought was worth investing in. And so that led to that first check led to us then being able to bring in the NRMA as Australia's largest membership mutual into the fund. And then that then led us to discussions with QIC for about a year and going through a whole process with QIC around the Venture Capital Development Fund and being fortunate enough to be one of the first funds across the VCDF program to get an allocation from QIC via Queensland Treasury. And that changed the game for us. It allowed us to have broader discussions with much larger market players. We were suddenly able to have international discussions that people wouldn't pick up the telephone for before. And it ultimately resulted in the last major investor coming in, which is a Malaysian supermarket chain called Segi Fresh, which really saw what we were doing as an opportunity for early technology adoption, but to sit alongside cornerstone investors that actually brought credibility to what they do as well. And so I guess in a nutshell, that was the journey. It's been a really interesting 6 years to go from zero to here. And, there's a lot of work still to go ahead of us, but we're 9 investments in, 2 term sheets in market will take us to 11 and well on the way, hopefully to becoming, one of the really, really good supporters of founders across the ag and the food tech space in Australia.
Mark, what is your investment thesis in essence?
Yeah.
Why do you invest where you do? What's the gap you see? What's the opportunity you see? Why are you excited about it?
Yeah. I think when you're entrepreneurial, Wayne, as you know, you're looking for opportunities where others aren't playing and where you can have an impact. Because there's no point going and doing something that everyone else is doing or that someone else has done. For us, and for me and my passions and the background I came from, the land in Australia and working the land is incredibly important to the country. It's been important to our development. It's been important to immigration and important to where we sit as a global player. I think not a lot of people realize, but a population of coming on 27, 28 million now, our food systems feed over 70 million people globally. And
Isn't that
not many
amazing?
people realize that. And that's with almost no investment, almost no support, and almost no financial product support outside of foreign investors wanting to buy land. And for me, with the team and, Tim who's my partner at the fund here, when we looked at that opportunity, we thought, why on earth is no one supporting this category? It represents an enormous amount of GDP. It provides enormous amounts of employment, export, and investment. Yet there is no capital going into it from alternatives perspective and from a venture perspective. And it just seemed like the opportunity is now. And certainly the opportunity with the emerging middle class across East and Southeast Asia, which represents 700 million people and that fastest growing middle class on the planet. We would have been crazy to not take the bull by the horns and say, okay, we can really make something work here. And so like any entrepreneur and any innovator, you spot an opportunity and you run like hell and make it work as you go. For me, that was really important. Queensland itself, 90% of our land is agricultural land. And again, little capital goes into it from a venture perspective and from a perspective of capital going from an innovation style as opposed to just commoditized property. So for us, that was enormously important. And that was really the principle behind the birth of Mandalay. Our North Star, Wayne, for Fund 1 is to sustainably feed the world's growing population. So everything we do, everything we invest in, and the way in which we invest points towards how do we better feed a population in a more efficient manner, in a healthier, more productive manner, and in a way that's going to support food security as well as innovation. And so that was really the North Star and the rails around what we wanted to do. To break that down a bit further, the current fund looks at 3 areas of the AgTech and the food tech landscape: upstream, midstream, and downstream. Upstream being on-farm or close to farm gate investments. They take a bit longer to mature and get to market. Midstream is that supply chain logistics, value-added manufacturing, provenance traceability, lots of liquidity in the space, lots of M&A activity in the space, mostly mid-market exits, but a lot of activity. And then downstream is more around that software side where software can really be used to improve efficiencies in food production. And so we mitigate our investment risk across seed to Series A and then overlay that with upstream, midstream, and downstream to provide our investors with an opportunity to really look at everything from on-farm to consumer end and to give us, a very broad exposure to amazing founders and innovators that sit across that whole category as well.
So have you got an example, Mark, of one of the investments you've made that is in each of those categories? So people listening can go, okay, now this makes sense.
Yeah. So here in Queensland, we invested in a company called Embryo, MBRYO, which actually has technology around the replication of bovine embryos. So normally with cattle, now this could be dairy, beef, wagyu, anything, IVF is generally used for pregnancy, but it's very expensive. It's over $1,000 for an IVF cycle. An egg or an embryo might be able to be split once or twice, so you might get a 20 out of it. Embryo have technologies that allow that egg to actually split multiple times. They also have created a medical device that allows for the farmer on site to be able to actually insert that embryo themselves.
Wow.
They've developed technology around the growth medium. They've got AI around the actual development of the embryos themselves. And their aim is to really bring the cost of in vitro fertilization for cattle like that down from $1,300, $1,500 to $100.
Yeah,
so that
fantastic.
starts to commoditize the ability for farmers to have essentially superior genetic breeds. Their motto is 7 years in 7 days. So what would normally take a herd of animals 7 years to get to genetic superiority, they can do in 7 days in a Petri dish. So it's not genetic modification, it's just splitting and multiplication of embryos. And so they've got a number of herds now actually running around Nimbawimba out here in Queensland, founded by Ewan Murdoch, who was the founder of Heron Pharmaceuticals. And so that's a good example of an upstream investment. Midstream, there's a really, really cool investment we've got at the moment in a company called Escavox based in Sydney. Their track and trace provenance traceability technology. Essentially, they have an IoT device that you can put into post-farm gate shipments for trucks and fruit and vegetables, and it can detect things like humidity, temperature, vibration, GPS, and other factors that it can actually then detect once a piece of fruit or vegetable gets to the shelf of a retailer, how long it can actually sit on the shelf for. So based on the conditions it was transported in. So you know that, okay, we've transported avocados at this temperature for this long, it went in or out of zone, or it went over a bump and they all got bruised. We know now where it got bruised. We've got insurance claim policy backup for that. But at the other end, they can also, through a series of using AI platforms and their own intelligence, detect the internal pulp temperature of fruit and vegetables when they're actually being transported, which then can determine how long it's going to be on shelf for. So, if it was in or out of temperature, it might only be two days. If it was in temperature and it's great, it might be a week and a half. And so that's really cool technology as well. That increases the viability and the transportation of food. And then down at the downstream end, we've got a company based in Victoria. So we've hit Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria.
Yep, well done.
Called Restoke. That company has co-pilot software for restaurants to reduce food waste and increase efficiencies across cost production. And so I think that company is doing particularly well as well. They all are doing really well. That one is helping the restaurants that they work with increase profitability by up to 100%. Very, very sticky, and is making restaurants and food retailers significantly more profitable. There are lots of others. We've got 9 investments in the current portfolio, 4 in the previous 2 term sheets out at the moment, that fill across that upstream, midstream, downstream category. That starts to give you a sense of the sorts of things we look at. It's a very tangible portfolio in that it's things you can touch, feel, and have an immediate impact.
So I can really see how those examples kind of align with your thesis of feeding people, right? Like each one of them plays into global scale food availability, which is really cool. And it's an underserved industry and investment thesis. You've got Fund 1, you've got 2 term sheets out. How much more capital do you have to deploy in Fund 1? And what's your plan for Fund 2?
We'll probably be fully deployed by the end of this year, if not Q1 2027. I think the portfolio size will probably be somewhere between 14 and 16 companies at that stage, where we'll move that portfolio into harvest. And harvest is where you're actually then working very closely with the companies to help them build, grow, identify exit opportunities, and then get them in a structure that makes them appealing for potential acquirers. And I think one of the differences that perhaps we have because of the category we're in, is that you have to be very hands-on the whole way through. There's no sit back and hope they grow. It's, okay, we're going to get dirty. We're going to sit down with the companies. We're going to identify acquirers. We're going to start to build the company around a format that is going to be appealing to acquirers. So I think another 12 months of deployment for Fund 1. With any venture fund, you never stop raising. So whether it's for current or future, you're always raising. Our aspirations for Fund 2 are certainly to launch something next year in 2027 and to have a much larger footprint, global footprint. Under our current remit, we have some limitations around our investment profiling. We're an early stage venture capital limited partnership. Tim and I were in Singapore in November at the Asia Pacific Agri-Food Innovation Summit. It was a 2-day event. We were approached through the conference app from 44 startups seeking capital from around the world.
Yeah,
so,
wow.
Amazing companies from Israel, Singapore, China, European countries, Amsterdam, the US seeking capital, which really surprised me, Wayne, because what it's telling me is that there just aren't that many allocators in the food and the ag space. It's great to see so many ag and food tech companies out there, but the thing that's heartbreaking is that there's so little capital to support them. And so Fund 2 for us will certainly have a global mandate. We want to be able to support wider food systems. We'll still have a big focus on Australia, but we don't want to necessarily have the geographic restrictions that limit 1, LPs, and 2, the number of companies we can invest in.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So, Mark, for all the founders listening, you've got 9 investments now. You've got 2 term sheets out, so you're probably going to get to 11. I think you said you're aiming for 14 to 16 investments. So you might have another 3 to 4 spots in Fund 1 for potential Australian early stage ag tech, food tech founders.
Love to see another 3 or 4 investments in the portfolio. And as I said, it's not just on farm, it's everything that sits within supply chain, transport, logistics, provenance, and then downstream as well. I wish to God we had more money to deploy more capital into Australian companies. But yes, another 4 investments or so into this fund following the next 2. And then we'll turn our attention to a global mandate, which will still have a focus on Australia. We'll still be sitting here in Brisbane, Australia, identifying, some of the best ag tech and food tech companies in the country, but also across the region.
From what I understand, the Queensland government's currently looking at deploying up to 30 million into the sector. So hopefully there's an opportunity for you guys to partner with them, and whether that's manage that fund on their behalf or participate in managing part of it. It would be great to see the Queensland government leveraging a local Queensland expert company focused on investing in ag tech. So, hopefully something like that comes out.
That would be amazing. Look, we can't thank the Queensland government enough for the support through the BCDF that we have received. It's allowed us to establish ourselves and really double down on some fantastic Queensland companies. Yes, there is a little bit more money coming through, I think it's called Sowing the Seeds, which is about 30 million. Whether that goes to allocators or whether it goes into other areas of deployment, what we want to see is that money getting into the hands of founders in the ag tech and the food tech space so that they can grow and flourish and move into broader markets. It's a small amount. We need more. It's really only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what the state needs and what the country needs from an allocation perspective. But it's certainly a good start following what the BCDF has done. And yeah, we'd love to see more capital flowing into the sector because it provides great returns and it's doing really important things around food systems for Australia.
Yeah, and it's funding jobs and companies and industries in regional Queensland, which is, you said it before, 90% of the state's land is under farm, right? It's agricultural land. So agriculture is a huge part of our economy and our society. And I think the Queensland government's doing a great job by investing into this industry through sowing the seeds.
The three things we see, Wayne, with Australia, the sheer size of the country, which most foreign investors don't understand when we go and speak to them, is that we actually cover almost every climatic condition for agriculture across the world. So we have our tropical condition, we have our temperate conditions down in Victoria, and then sub across, New South Wales. And so whether you're in South America, Northern USA, Southern USA, parts of Asia, our technologies that we create here as founders and as startups are relevant to any particular place in the world. And I think that's what very few investors that are global understand, is that, what we do here has applicability anywhere in the world, depending on climatic condition.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And the other thing that I think is a real competitive advantage of Australian AgTech founders is the culture and nature of ag as an industry and AgTech specifically. Those founders are incredibly hands-on. They're very, very capital efficient. They're very thoughtful and good problem solvers. So they're solving really tangible problems in very smart ways and getting there in a capital efficient way.
Mm.
So I look at the investments in my portfolio and I think about the ability those companies have to scale because they're scaling from a very capital efficient base, a very thoughtful and pragmatic leadership style grounded in growing good businesses.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to be at QIC working with the team to create and deploy the Venture Capital Development Fund. And there were 6 of us on that team, and we had 55 applications from venture firms to participate in the program. We did detailed DD on 55 firms. Each of us had 10, right? And then the way we worked was we would take the best firms and present them back to the team. And if we recommended one go through to the next stage, which I was lucky enough to have you guys. And so I reviewed you guys in the first instance, presented Mandalay back to the team. Then someone else on the team picked up Mandalay, did detailed DD on Mandalay. And then they presented a recommendation back. And if they also recommended it, then we did another deep dive, right? And so
I remember the process well, yes.
Yeah. It was an incredible process, right? And one of the things that stands out to me is the caliber of the firms that got through. In no small way, Mandalay stood out. And even though you were an incredibly early stage firm, the quality of your fund documentation, your thoughtfulness, the experience of you and Tim, and the thesis that you invest in all came together really perfectly to encourage the investment committee to back Mandalay with an investment from the BCDF. And it's great to hear that investment created a platform and helped you attract additional capital and helped you to build your brand and become even more prominent on a global stage as a leading global AgTech investor. That's great to see a program like that having such a positive influence on the trajectory and potential of a Queensland-based venture firm. It's exciting.
It was absolutely needed for Queensland because government intervention is always really appreciated where there are areas of market failure. And certainly in Queensland, we had a lack. Certainly Victoria and New South Wales don't have a lack of financial markets. They're certainly very frothy from a financial markets perspective. Queensland didn't necessarily have that. We had a couple of really good syndicates that were being run, and Steve was running one, and there are a few others around, but not a lot of established venture firms that allowed founders to run through a venture process. And I think one of the things that we took very, very seriously from day one, and this probably came from our days at CEA when we were investing for the university, and we were audited by the Queensland Audit Office and essentially institutional grade, even though we were very small, is that one of the most important factors when you're running a firm or a venture fund is that you're actually dealing with other people's money. And those other people, whether they be QIC or high net worths, are trusting you implicitly in the deployment of their capital. appreciating the importance of managing other people's money and the way in which we deploy that money is paramount. And so we're not a fast investor by any means. And I wish we were faster, but we're not, because the responsibilities we have to our investors to undertake, the amount of diligence we have to undertake, the reporting we do, each of our diligence documents is 40 to 50 pages long. It's a little PhD, every single investment. But it has to be, because we are investing other people's money that trust us with the capital that they've deployed to us. And whether it's QIC or a high net worth that might have put 100K into the fund, we treat them all the same. And that word of trust is everything when it comes to funds management. And we don't take that lightly.
Yeah, as a fund manager, you have a fiducial responsibility to return shareholder value, right? That is your single most important job. You overlay that with a set of values and an investment thesis and having a positive impact on the industry and the sector, but you've got to have your ducks in a row.
Yeah, there's an interesting point to add on to that, which is where there's not necessarily a contradiction, but a competitive tension, Wayne, around managing other people's money and deploying that under the strictest of parameters. On the flip side of that, being a fund that is very proud to say that we're founder friendly. We put forward terms that we think in the best interest of the founder. Being founder friendly and also being institutional grade doesn't always go hand in hand, because sometimes LPs might want you to be slightly more aggressive towards founders. But I think we've found a really good balance. One, you've got to be very careful with the LPs you select. You don't just take anyone's money, because they've got to be aligned with your thesis and the way you operate. And two, investing in founders that are coachable and understanding that taking other people's money is a very important step for growth, but it means that they have an added set of responsibilities that they didn't have before they took other people's money. It's a really interesting balance that we play between being as founder friendly as possible, but having terms that are also the best terms for our limited partners. I think we've found the right spot for that so far, which is good.
Mark, one of the things that I remember about Mandalay was your mantra of sleeves up capital, that responsibility post-investment to genuinely help the founder and the business to hit milestones, make better quality decisions, avoid potholes, and ultimately scale, raise the next round of capital and get themselves to a position where they're acquisition ready. Have you guys got a playbook for that, or how do you do that?
Yeah, we have a clear set of SOPs that we follow, but a lot of what you do is because the love of it, Wayne. And with a relatively small fund, which we've probably brought in an extra $50 million worth of capital to the companies we've invested in through our own network. Now, that's not easy to do. It's really hard, because we're selling our fund. We're selling every portfolio company that we've invested in as well to the network. And it's in our best interest, in our LP's best interest to get as much money into these companies as possible to help them grow. When we're triaging a company, we look at how much capital they need to get to from here to point A, and then what's the capital intensity going to be along the whole journey of the company. So this is between now and, let's say, 7 years' time to get to where they need to be acquired. If that capital intensity exceeds what we can do to support them, it's not a great deal for us. But if we believe that we can support that level of capital intensity through our network, our own deployment, embedding people. So we've embedded quite a few executives within the startups we work with through our venture network. Those are the things that I think differentiate you from, a VC that's running a fund and operating under normal circumstances, but also to help grow a category that is not necessarily traditionally been known as a venture category.
Mate, it's really exciting. Let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about the personal journey that you've been on, right? What's one thing about starting and operating a fund that founders probably aren't aware of?
Yeah, so it's such a good question, and it's a discussion we often have. Raising a fund is really, really hard and really, really expensive. Raising the money, for us, it's been a 4-year journey to raise capital. So we've been raising for 4 years and deploying capital over that same period of time, and having to manage all of the governance requirements you have as a financial license holder, not drawing a salary for a very long period of time. So it's not for the faint-hearted, which is why VCDF was so important, and why actually we got some support capital from LaunchVic. That was incredibly important as well, because that really helped us cover some of those early costs, and they're significant. And so we're always raising money like a startup. It never stops. We're deploying money like a startup. It never stops. We are responsible to our investors like a startup. That never stops. And then we have governance and reporting requirements under Australian financial license law that never stops. And so it's certainly not a job that's a 9 to 5. It's 24/7, and you squeeze in everything you can around that. But it is essentially like a startup. The difference being You're dealing with sort of, in many cases, large institutional money, and reporting requirements are really significant. So that being said, the benefits and the positives you get out of it when you cut a check with a founder and you see their face, or you see a first sale, or you see a deal that they've struck, makes everything worthwhile.
Yeah. So note to founders out there, if you're working with an Australian VC firm and they're looking for a monthly or a quarterly report, an update on your progress and traction, provide it to them, because it's going to help the VC report back to their limited partners, their investors. It's going to help the VC demonstrate the value they're adding. It's going to help the VC raise the next fund, and that's going to put more capital into the market and the thesis that those founders are in. So,
and hopefully, if it's a no, we explain why it's a no. It's a no is not because it's not a good company. It might not be at the right stage. It might not be at the right time. It might be it's too high or too low in terms of valuation. And a no is never a no forever. No is only ever a no for now. And that's something that's probably quite important.
Could be a no because you have 5 other investments on at the same time and you just don't have bandwidth. Or it could be a no because you're looking at something that's already very similar, or you have something that's almost identical in your portfolio already. Hey, Mark, we've actually answered question 1, 2, and 3 of 7 questions. So we're going to jump on to question 4. Pick a pivotal moment, a deal, a missed opportunity, a founder relationship, a shift in the market, or something. What's been a pivotal moment for you guys? What happened? What did you learn from that experience? What's the takeaway that you'll apply next time?
Yeah. I think sort of the big pivotal moment early on was the first check. You suddenly realize that someone wants to support you. It's an emotional moment because it's kind of like a confirmation that what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve is shared by others as well. So that's a really pivotal moment, and it gives you the energy to go on. In terms of deals, I think the thing that is the most fulfilling thing, Wayne, and I think you probably would have experienced this as well, is that we take a board or an observer role on every deal we make. And it's not because we want to whack founders around, it's because we want to be part of the journey. And we want to support them as part of the journey. And those relationships you build with founders as you're sitting next to them and going through the grinds and going through the challenges and raising rounds and then celebrating around being raised together, they're the things you remember. You don't remember all of the other stuff. You remember the look on Anna's face from Cropify when they close a deal, or the look on one of our investments in Amsterdam, Full Foods, which is extracting the functional constituents of spirulina. When they land a food ingredients company in the US and you look at the founders' faces and you just feel, okay, I get it. I know why I do this now. That's the stuff that I think we do it for. It's those moments. And as I said, they're few and far between early in the cycle of the VC fund. Hopefully, as you get more towards the harvest phase, they become more replicable. But they're the things that really you remember. And they're the things that, once I finish being, I guess an investor in this capacity, they're the things I remember is the working alongside founders. One of our funds, actually one of the companies we invested in at Sea, was a 2017 investment exited last year. And so I hadn't spoken to the founder in about, 4 or 5 years. And I got an email from Gerard late last year. He said, Mark, hey, I think we're about to go through a trade sale. I sat on the board of the company when I was at CEA. And he said, look, it was awesome having you on the board. We haven't forgotten about everything you did for us. We're having a celebration party for all of our great investors on Sydney Harbour on a yacht. We'd love you to come.
That is great.
Now, I couldn't go because I was preoccupied doing things, but just hearing that story, knowing the challenges and the trials and tribulations that Gerard as a founder went through, to the point where you can now see him celebrate and exit, go on to the next things he wants to do, but bringing his investors along the way. That's why you do this, to see, the success in the eyes of the founders that we invest in, and hopefully providing good capital returns to our investors.
Hey, what's been one of the hardest decisions or challenges that you face as a GP? And explain what a GP is as well.
So a general partner is the organization or the company that manages the capital for a venture capital fund. So we call that a GP. An LP, the limited partner, are the investors into the GP. So they're your high net worths and your super funds and things like that. We invest quite early, Wayne. So we invest seed to Series A. In many cases, we're the first institutional check into a business. And so we're setting the terms of what a deal looks like, and we're trying to make it as founder friendly as possible. It gives the founders the space to grow and the opportunity to be flexible with their business and to deploy capital. Real challenges I've noticed in the last 18 to 24 months have come in when those companies are doing subsequent raises and they're bringing in investors from perhaps other jurisdictions, Europe or the US. And these investors that are coming in later with other jurisdictions don't have the same founder-friendly mentality. A company gets a term sheet, but sometimes those terms are really predatory. Founders don't see them. You've got to explain to them, well, 2 or 3 times liquidation preference is going to screw you over, or you're now at the bottom of the waterfall on an exit. You're not going to get any capital back, or your price round is actually going to be a down round and has been stuffed. So there's some of the challenges that we have to battle and face.
Having that wisdom to be able to share with them is incredibly valuable. Mark, you've been on this journey for a long time. So for you, as managing partner of the fund, husband, parent, a community member, how do you sustain your energy? How do you balance the time commitments, and how do you get up every morning and keep on going? What's a lesson that you can share?
I'm very, very lucky in that the age difference between myself and Tim is 19 years. And so where I am in life is not where he's at in life. He's flexible. He can move around. He does a lot of the overseas travel. He does a lot of late hours. And so our skill sets there are very complementary, and our stages of life actually give us very different views, complementary views on things. But I don't think I've ever told you this, to be honest, Wayne, but I noticed that sort of between 2017, 18 and what would be today that you went through a real health journey yourself. And
yeah, definitely.
You did it publicly because you were chief entrepreneur for quite some time. And I found myself over the last few years becoming a slave to the work and the system and not taking care of myself physically from both a mental perspective, but also from just physical perspective, what you do, what you eat, if you train and all those sorts of things. Probably this time last year, I was at a stage where I like, you know what, I'm not happy with where I am physically in life. I don't have the energy. I don't have the mental stamina. I knew the journey ahead that was coming up that we'd have to be embarking on. And I don't mean to blow your trumpet, but I did look at you and what you went through and the profound change that you put into your lifestyle after Red Eye to get your health back to where you wanted it to be and to become more of a physical specimen so you can be a great dad and a great partner and have more energy in life. And you know that in your head. You know that healthy body, healthy mind gives you a healthier life, but not many people practice it. And I made a conscious effort sort of towards mid to end of last year to reprioritize some of my time into mental health, but also physical health. And I think that's something that young founders take for granted because you recover and bounce back so quickly. But as you get to our age, Wayne, and the numbers of 4 and 5 come in front of your age, these are things you really have to start to take into account that I've started to take on much more seriously over the last sort of 12 months. I look back on your journey and got a lot of inspiration from that. Mark Salby as well. And you know what Mark's done and what Mark's been through over the years, and the fact that he's pushing himself through the training, and there's the release of the documentary coming up. And at some point you've got to go, look, these folks that have been through it with you, alongside you, before you, the tribulations, the trials, the challenges, there's one common thread in that mind, body, and work needs to be aligned. And I think once you sort of get over 40, if you haven't got that aligned, you burn out really, really quickly.
I'm in my early 50s at the moment, and I'm going through this bout of injuries. So I had an injury last year on a motorbike trip. I had an injury 2 weeks ago on a snowboarding trip. Next week, I'm going in to get my shoulder reconstructed. That's going to take me out for 6 months. It's having that balance, that mental health, that physical health, that emotional health it's not a distraction from work. It is a capacity builder for work. And it doesn't matter if you're an investor or a founder, keeping that front of mind. So my number one goal now is lifelong health and fitness.
Yeah.
That everything else, my family, my wife, my wealth creation, everything else comes after that. And I'm not perfect by any stretch. There are people that have incredible discipline and do it every day. But I just think getting up every morning and having a crack the best way you can is incredibly powerful. Having an investor like Mandalay sitting beside an Aussie AgTech, food tech company, water tech company, incredible opportunity for founders. It's also a great opportunity for investors. And so we're coming up on question 7 of 7 questions, and that is, how do people get involved?
Yeah.
For investors, let's talk investors for a moment, because I think often a lot of people think that investing in venture capital is out of their reach. So who could invest in your fund? What qualifications do they need to have? And what's the starting check size? What's a big check size for a person and then for an institution?
Yeah, so it's different for different groups. I guess syndicates are different because syndicates can often work across retail markets, which is sort of, your standard mums and dads. We tend to work across institutional markets and sophisticated investors, and there's a means test to be classified as a sophisticated investor. Essentially, in a nutshell, it means someone that understands that they might lose their money. And if they lose their money, it's not going to detrimentally impact their life. So we don't really necessarily want to take money from mums and dads where they mortgage their house. That's not what this is about. This is a high risk investment category with the potential for high returns. Most of our investors are family offices, high net worth individuals or institutions. Sophisticated investors can come in, and we do have some in the fund as well. Various funds will differ for check sizes. Syndicates, you'll find, will take small checks, $5, $10, $15, $20,000. For us, it's normally a couple of hundred that gets in the door. Investors that are aligned with our thematic and our thesis, the importance of food and ag, food security, transport and logistics, Australian provenance and traceability, sovereign capability, those are the sorts of investors that I think resonate with what we do. The great thing about venture is that you have syndicates, you have small funds, you have big funds, you have thematically focused funds. There's almost something for everyone. So you can start to get your teeth wet and start to develop that passion for a relatively small amount of money and then work up from there.
A senior executive, they have to have earned over $250,000 a year for the last couple of years, and they have a couple of million dollars
in assets.
Then they can get a certificate from their accountant that says that they meet the criteria for a sophisticated investor. I think beyond meeting the criteria, people actually have to understand the venture capital investment model and understand, how long their money's tied up for, what the risk profile is, and where it should fit as part of a balanced portfolio. We're certainly not giving any financial advice here. People can reach out to you at Mandalay.
They can be on LinkedIn, coming through the website portal. We're actually about to rebrand. So Mandalay is about to change its name to Tundra or Tundra Capital, TUNDRA. That'll all be sort of put out in the market over the next probably 4 to 6 weeks. We're at a lot of events for a lot of activities across the country. Our door's always open for people to come and have a chat to us, whether it's email, and it's really easy for me. It's mark@mandalay.vc, or whether it's via LinkedIn or Tim, our other partner, or any of our venture partners. There's lots of ways to get hold of us if they're interested.
Sweet. And we'll put all your contact details and the company's contact details and LinkedIn page and everything in the show notes so people can get a hold of you. If founders are looking to have a conversation with you, Mark, what's the best way they could do that?
Mandalay.vc is our website, and there's actually a founder portal that they can actually put all of their information in, a short summary of what they do, attach a deck, and it'll come straight through to us. That's probably the most common way. If we meet someone at an event or at a function or an ecosystem event, then they'll meet us, they can get our details and just send us directly. We get maybe 100 to 1,000 deals come into our inbox a year. And if they're all coming into a single inbox, it's hard to manage. But if they go through the portal, it's all managed really well. So that's probably the best way.
Sweet. Lots of ways to get in contact with Mark and the guys at Mandalay to progress either an investment if you're someone looking to invest in AgTech or food tech. And if you're a founder in the AgTech, food tech space, complete the profile online and drop the guys a note. Mark, thank you for answering our 7 challenging questions designed to help people get to know you and understand more about your fund, some of the experiences you've had and lessons you've learned. We like to finish by going through a rapid fire 7 questions. So you ready?
Sure.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Morning or night?
Morning.
Beach or mountains?
I'm in Queensland. It's got to be beach.
Books or podcasts?
Podcasts. I'm on a podcast. It's got to be podcasts.
What's a podcast you're listening to at the moment other than 7 questions?
I do listen to All In because I like to get the views on the eccentric American style. I listen to a number of VC podcasts. So Swimming with Allocators. I love a podcast called Acquired, which does like a 4-hour deep dive on businesses. It could be, Porsche, Microsoft, Disney. It's amazing. It's like a masterclass on business growth.
Home or office?
Office, just because I have 3 young kids and working at home is very difficult.
I love it. Okay. Now, we talked a little bit about health and energy, but are you a gym or cardio guy?
Gym with forced cardio.
Yep. Love it. And last question, who's one founder or investor you would love to hear from on 7 questions?
I don't know if he's been on yet. I don't know if he's a mate of yours, and I know he's about to launch a documentary series. I would love to hear from Mark Gustowski, and I know he's got a doco coming out.
Mark Gustowski's got a documentary coming out called Don't Be Prey, and it's launching in a month's time, actually. Very exciting. So Mark Gustowski, if you're out there, we want to get you on 7 questions, mate. Mark, thank you so much for sharing the journey that you've been on, the amazing work you're doing at Mandalay Venture Partners in the food and AgTech space. We'll put all your contact details in the show notes, and I'd love to see people, both people who are looking to invest and also founders in the space, reach out to Mark and see how Mandalay can partner with you. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Wayne. You've been an anchor of the ecosystem here in Queensland for so long, and from our side, I want to thank you for all of the work and support you've given to the whole industry over the last decade as well. You're one of those that's helped build it, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks for listening to this episode of 7 Questions. If you'd like to learn more about the founders, you can get a link to the full show notes in the description below. Have a great day. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode.